Long before Aokigahara in Japan became associated with modern urban legends, locals already feared the forest. The dense woodland at the base of Mount Fuji had a reputation for confusing travelers. Compasses were known to behave strangely because of the volcanic rock beneath the soil, and the thick forest often muffled sounds, making it difficult to judge distance or direction. According to stories passed down among woodcutters and charcoal burners, strange lights were occasionally seen moving through the trees after dark. One such account concerns a young merchant traveling between villages around 1908. Heavy rain delayed his journey, and by the time he entered the forest, dusk began to settle over the trail. As darkness fell, he noticed what appeared to be a lantern glowing ahead of him. Relieved, he assumed another traveler was using the same path. But something about the light seemed strange. No matter how quickly he walked, it never appeared any closer. Instead, the lantern seemed to drift deeper into the forest. Curious, he continued following it. Minutes passed, then nearly an hour, and still the lantern remained just out of reach. That was when he heard something unusual, the sound of wooden sandals. At first, he thought it was another traveler. Then he realized there wasn't just one set of footsteps, there were several, moving along the trees, always nearby, always just beyond sight. The merchant called out. No one answered. The footsteps continued, following him through the darkness. By now, fear had begun to creep in. He stopped following the lantern and turned around, hoping to find his way back to the road. When dawn finally arrived, he discovered just how lost he had become. Sometime during the night, he had wandered far from the trail and spent hours within sight of a steep lava ravine. Had he continued any further, the journey might have ended very differently. When he eventually reached a nearby village and told the locals what had happened, they weren't surprised. According to them, he had followed a fox lantern. Some believe these mysterious lights were created by fox spirits. Others claimed they were the spirits of the dead, luring travelers away from safe paths and deeper into the forest. Whatever the truth may have been, the merchant reportedly refused to travel through Aokigahara ever again. And even today, stories of strange lights in the forest continue to be told. Mount Ophir has long been surrounded by stories. Known locally as Gunung Ladang on the Malaysia Singapore border, it is steeped in a dark and tragic folklore. Even today, hikers, villagers, and travelers speak of strange experiences on the mountain. Some talk of phantom lights moving through the forest. Others claim to hear music where no people should be. And then there are stories about the fourth station, a place where locals say the mountain listens. This story dates back to the early 1900s. According to local accounts, two friends were traveling through the Mount Ophir region. The first was quiet and respectful. The second believed every superstition was nonsense. Whenever villagers warned them about the mountain, he laughed. When told not to wander from the trail, he rolled his eyes. And when an elderly villager advised him never to shout into the forest, he openly mocked the warning. "The mountain can't hear me," he said. As they continued their journey, they eventually reached an area locals call the fourth station. The atmosphere there felt different. The forest usually echoes with the sound of nocturnal animals, but it was unusually silent. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every sound you make. The boastful traveler picked up a stone and tossed it toward the forest. Then he cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Come on, then!" His voice echoed through the trees. "Show yourself!" His companion immediately told him to stop. The villagers had warned them specifically about this place, but the traveler only laughed. A few moments later, they heard music somewhere in the distance. It was impossible to make out. At first, it sounded like wind. Then the rhythm became clearer. They could hear drums, and then what appeared to be voices, something that resembled a celebration, almost as if there was a wedding taking place somewhere deep within the forest. The two men exchanged a glance. There were no villages nearby. They weren't aware of any kind of settlement. There was nothing that could explain the sound. The boastful traveler grinned. "You hear that?" His companion nodded. "There are people out there." And before his friend could stop him, he stepped off the trail and disappeared into the trees. The music continued. His companion waited. 5 minutes became 10, and then 20 minutes. The celebration carried on somewhere in the darkness. Then suddenly, it stopped. Every sound vanished at once. The forest became silent again. The traveler never returned. The following morning, a search party was organized. They searched the trails, the ravines, and the cliffs, every path leading off the mountain. They could not find a body. There were no signs of a struggle or any footprints leading away. The only item ever recovered was his backpack. It had been carefully placed in a small clearing near a cliff edge. And what was even stranger, every item inside had been removed and arranged around in a perfect circle. The villagers claimed the mountain had taken him. Others believed he had become lost and fallen somewhere beyond the search area. But this strange detail came from the friend who survived. He insisted that just before the music stopped, he heard his companion laughing. And then dozens of other voices began laughing with him. That was a very odd detail. The search continued for weeks. Nothing was ever found. And to this day, the locals still advise visitors to respect the mountain. And if you ever hear music coming from somewhere it shouldn't, stay on the trail no matter how curious you are. On a humid night in 1959, the city of Calcutta was still alive with activity. Hand pull rickshaws moved through the narrow lanes while the main streets remained crowded long after sunset. Shiva and Anand were best friends. Shiva came from a comfortable middle class family, while Anand spent most of his days helping his father at a small cycle repair shop. The friendship began because of a bicycle. Shiva owned an imported bicycle fitted with dynamo, something that attracted plenty of attention in the neighborhood. The bicycle also seemed to suffer punctures more often than it should, and Anand was usually the one to fix them. Over time, the boys became inseparable. Shiva's father, Mr. Gosal, was a strict man who believed in discipline. Early to bed and early to rise was a rule he followed without exception. What he didn't know was that his 16-year-old son regularly slipped out of the house late at night to watch movies with Anand. His mother knew more than she let on. She would quietly give him a little pocket money, but always warn him to be careful. One night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Shiva left home at around 9:15. As usual, he climbed down the pipe running alongside the house and met with Anand waiting at the street with his bicycle. The boys rode doubles, their preferred method of transport, and headed to a nearby cinema. The movie ended late. By the time they started cycling home, it was close to midnight. Neither of them was worried, of course. They had done this many times before. As they approached the turning that led to Shiva Street, something felt different. The street lights suddenly went out. The road ahead disappeared into darkness. Even the small tea stalls that normally stayed open late into the night had already closed. Anand tightened his grip on the handlebars. You need to bring your own bicycle. You're getting too heavy. Shiva laughed. Then the boys fell silent. Ahead of them, sitting on top of a lamppost, was a woman dressed in a glowing white sari. She was calmly running her fingers through her long hair. The boys stared. A moment later, she vanished and then reappeared farther down the road. Neither of them spoke. Don't look at her, Anand finally whispered. His voice trembled. He tried to pedal faster, but the bicycle felt strangely heavy. The woman disappeared again. This time, the bicycle barely seemed to move at all. Shiva suddenly became aware of a cold breeze behind them. Then came the strong, unmistakable scent of jasmine. Neither boy turned around, but both had the same feeling. Whatever they had seen was no longer in front of them, it was behind them, and it was gripping the bicycle. By now, they had reached the corner of Shiva Street. The boys jumped off the bicycle and ran. They never bothered looking back. They raced to the front door, shouting at the top of their lungs and pounding on it with all their strength. The lights immediately came on inside the house. A furious Mr. Gosel opened the door. But before he could say a word, the boys rushed past him. The both of them were shivering and speaking so quickly that nobody could understand what they were saying. Shiva's mother quickly sprinkled holy water from the Ganga that she stored in bottles around them and placed holy ash on their forehead. Everyone in the house started talking at once. His mother wanted to know what happened. His father was furious that the boys had sneaked out again. The boys tried to explain, but they were both speaking so fast and stumbling over their words that nobody could make sense of what they were saying. The only word everyone clearly heard was Petni. The Petni is typically defined as the restless and often vengeful ghost of a woman who died an unnatural death, either unmarried or with unfulfilled worldly desires. They are also known to shapeshift and most often appear as an attractive female entity luring young men at night. Although Mr. Gosel was angry, he could see that the boys were genuinely frightened. Whatever they had seen had shaken them badly. Eventually, he told them to stop talking and get some sleep. The discussion could wait until morning. The following day, after they had calmed down, Shiva and Anand explained everything properly. They told him about the streetlights going out, the woman sitting on top of the lamppost, the smell of jasmine, and the feeling that something had followed them right up to the corner of the street. Mr. Gosel listened without interrupting. And when they were finished, he left the house and walked to the spot where the boys claimed they had seen the woman. A short while later, Mr. Gosel returned home. The expression on his face immediately caught their attention. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked concerned. Anand's bicycle had been found at the corner of the street, completely mangled. The front wheel was twisted. The frame had bent in several places. It looked less like a bicycle and more like something that had been involved in a serious accident. The strange part was that neither boy remembered crashing. In fact, neither of them remembered what happened during the final moments before they reached the house. He simply looked at the wrecked bicycle and then at the boys standing in front of him and quietly said, "It could have been your bodies." Neither of them ever snuck out to watch a late night movie ever again. Sri Lanka, a beautiful island nation, lies just south of India, separated by the Gulf of Mannar. The people of Sri Lanka are mainly Sinhalese, with minority Tamil communities living across the country. For many years, conflict existed between the Sri Lankan government and the LTTE, an organization formed by Tamil militants. During that period, several prison camps were established to hold LTTE prisoners. One such camp was the Batticaloa prison camp. Today, the camp is still an active facility, and the country now enjoys a period of peace. A man called Bandara lived some distance away from the camp with his wife. The couple had no children. He owned a small seafood business, which did well in that region. His days started early, often before 3 a.m., when he would head out to purchase the freshest catch from local fishermen. Helping him at the shop was a young Tamil man named Murthy. Now, Murthy was around 20 years old and had lost his family during the years of political conflict. With nowhere else to go, Bandara allowed him to stay in a small room attached to the shop. The young man worked hard, followed instructions, and rarely complained. Despite that, he seemed lonely. Business usually concluded around 9 p.m. each night, and any unsold seafood was often given away to local families the following day. Over the past few weeks, however, Bandara began noticing small discrepancies in his inventory. A few fish missing here, a few prawns missing there. Nothing significant, at least not at first. He trusted Murthy and dismissed the losses. But as the weeks passed, the missing items became harder to ignore. Eventually, Bandara confronted him. Murthy denied knowing anything about it. But Bandara wasn't satisfied, so he decided to find for himself. A few nights later, after closing time, he pretended to head home as usual. Instead, he stayed back and watched the shop from a distance. He watched as Murthy finished cleaning and then stocked the freezer and tidied up the counters. For a moment, Pandara felt ashamed for suspecting him, but that feeling quickly passed. Murthy reached behind the freezer and pulled out a plastic bag. The bag appeared to be filled with seafood. Pandara watched as the young man locked the shop and began walking away from town. Curious, he followed him. The further they walked, the quieter the road became. The walk felt close to an hour. Eventually, Murthy turned toward the abandoned prison camp. Bandara immediately felt uneasy. Very few people went near the place. Locals often spoke about strange sounds coming from the camp at night. Some claimed they heard wailing. Others spoke of a smell resembling burning flesh. Whether those stories were true or not, most people preferred to stay away. Murthy climbed over the camp wall. Bandara hesitated. The place was dark. The walls looked like they were ready to collapse. But the thought of discovering what had been happening to his inventory pushed him forward. He was close behind, but did not want to be seen. He climbed a nearby tree and watched beyond the walls of the prison. Then he saw a light appear somewhere inside the prison yard. And what he saw next made no sense. Murthy had placed the bag on the ground and then started moving around in a strange dance. He tilted his head up and down while throwing the contents of the bag around him. Raw fish, prawns, everything that had been disappearing from the shop. Several minutes passed. The dance became faster, more frantic. Then Bandara heard something in the distance. The sound of leaves rustling. At first he thought it was the wind. Then figures began emerging from the darkness, tall, black, and in human form. They appeared one after another, gathering around the scattered seafood, and they began feeding on it. Bandara could not move. His stomach tightened. He just simply watched as all his hard earned savings were just being scattered on the ground and was simply being consumed by creatures he was not able to recognize. Are they really even human? Murthy finished emptying the bag and calmly turned to leave. At this point, Bandara climbed down the tree. He wasn't sure what to do next. So he hid behind the tree and watched as Murthy climbed over the wall and stood. At some point, Murthy turned and looked in Bandara's direction. A smile appeared on his face. Not a friendly smile, a knowing smile. Bandara now felt his stomach drop. Then he felt something behind him. A bony hand reached out from the darkness and wrapped itself around his throat. The next morning, Bandara's body was discovered. The village mourned his death with loud wailing and chest beating. Not long after the funeral, Murthy took charge of the seafood shop. No one questioned it. After all, he had been loyal and a hard-working servant. The shop was eventually handed over to him. But at what cost? I want to thank you for joining me this evening. I hope you enjoyed these stories. You can expect a new video in just a few days. So if you haven't already, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Story Lantern and joining me on this journey across Asia's forgotten folklore. Until next time, keep your lantern lit and stay curious.